You've heard of Edgar Allan Poe, the master of the macabre, the poet of the haunted mind. But what if I told you the horrors he wrote about weren't just imagination? That every scream, every heartbeat, every premature burial came from something that really happened? Because behind Poe's fiction hides a series of true stories. Tragedies so vivid, so cruel, that they bled straight from his life onto the page. Tonight, we're not just reading his tales. We're opening the case file on the man who lived them. This is the real story behind Edgar Allan Poe's darkest nightmares. Thunder rolls. To understand Poe's stories, you have to understand the ghost that followed him from the cradle, death. He was born in 1809, but before he could even speak, death claimed both his parents. His mother, a struggling actress, died of tuberculosis. His father vanished. Poe was taken in by the Allans, a wealthy family in Richmond, but even comfort couldn't protect him from the shadow of loss. Everywhere Poe went, death found him again, his foster mother, his brother, his wife. Each time, it took someone new. It left something behind, a story. And those stories were not about monsters, but about what happens when the human heart meets terror it can't escape. Poe didn't fear ghosts. He feared the ordinary horror of real life, and he turned that fear into art. But none of his fears were more real, or more widespread, than the one that swept through 19th century America like a nightmare in daylight, the fear of being buried alive. Imagine this. You wake up in the dark, you can't move. Your chest is heavy, you reach out, and your fingers hit wood. Now imagine realizing that wood is a coffin lid. In Poe's time, this was not fiction, it was news. Throughout the 1800s, stories spread of people pronounced dead, sealed in coffins, only to awaken underground. A woman in France found claw marks on the inside of her burial lid. A man in London was dug up to reveal bite wounds on his hands, from himself. Doctors called it suspended animation. The public called it what it was, hell. The panic grew so great that inventors began designing safety coffins, fitted with bells, breathing tubes, even flags, so the prematurely buried could signal the living. And while others tried to forget, Poe did the opposite. He turned that fear into one of his most chilling stories, the premature burial. In it, he describes, in surgical detail, the terror of waking inside a coffin, the suffocating silence, the slow realization that you've been sealed alive. It was so vivid that readers fainted. Why? Because it felt real. It was real. Poe had read every documented case, every rumor, every obituary that hinted at it, and he knew what his audience secretly feared most, not death itself, but dying without being dead. But there was another horror that Poe didn't have to read about. He lived it, and it would follow him into every room of his home, every cough, every drop of blood, every whisper in the dark. The 19th century had its own plague, tuberculosis. It swept through cities, wasting its victims away with slow, crimson violence. Poe's wife Virginia was just 13 when he married her. By 19, she began coughing up blood. Night after night, Poe sat beside her bed, listening to her lungs fail. That sound, the rattle in her chest, became the heartbeat of his fiction. He tried to fight the horror by writing it, and the result was The Mask of the Red Death. A prince hides from a plague behind castle walls. He throws a ball, masks, laughter, luxury, while the world outside drowns in blood. But death doesn't knock. It walks in. The Red Death held dominion over all. Poe's audience thought it was fantasy, but it was a love letter to the dying woman he couldn't save. Every color in the story, blue, purple, green, black, red, represented a stage of tuberculosis. The final room, the black one lit in red, was Virginia's deathbed. When she died, Poe didn't write for almost a year. He said her spirit never left him, that she appeared in his dreams, pale and patient, waiting. And when he finally wrote again, it was The Raven. The Raven isn't about a bird. It's about the mind breaking under the weight of grief. A man alone at midnight, a voice that won't answer him, except to say, nevermore. For Poe, it was Virginia's ghost in that room, a haunting he couldn't exorcise, and he kept returning to the same questions. How does love survive death? How far can memory twist before it becomes madness? Those questions became The Telltale Heart, The Black Cat, The Fall of the House of Usher. Each one a new experiment in terror, not of monsters, but of human guilt, sickness, and grief. Poe didn't write about the supernatural. He wrote about you, the part of you that dreads losing control, that wonders if you'd recognize madness if it came wearing your own face. That's why his stories still work. They're not about his century. They're about the parts of us we pretend aren't there. Poe died young, just 40 years old, found delirious in a gutter, wearing another man's clothes. No one knows what killed him. Alcohol? Disease? Murder? Or perhaps the ghosts he'd spent his life chasing finally caught him. But death didn't silence him. Because every time we feel a chill reading The Telltale Heart, every time we hear that heartbeat pounding in the dark, we are still hearing Poe's own. He turned his suffering into a mirror, and we still see ourselves in it. Tabophobia may be gone. Tuberculosis may be curable. But the fear of losing what we love, of being trapped inside our own mind, those terrors are timeless. So when people say Poe invented horror, they're wrong. He didn't invent it. He endured it, and maybe that's why his stories still breathe, because they were written by a man who looked death in the eye, and instead of turning away, took notes. The scariest thing about Poe isn't that he wrote about death.